Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video about the e-powered 780 Ti Matrix Platinum. And I'm happy to announce that the card is now in a state where it finally runs properly. So the things that change should be pretty obvious. I added capacitors. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There might be more capacitors to come. It's just that, like, as I mentioned, I kinda ran out of capacitors. I did find a little drawer full of these. These are not new. I did actually pull these off of a different card, but they still seem to be in rather good order. So I put these on, and yeah, they're definitely still doing something. Because, yeah, like, the first thing I noticed after turning the card on is that the coil wine is gone. So, yeah, actually, let's remove the cooler first. I recently got these quick disconnects, which makes it really convenient to, you know, like, have the card on water cooling, because I don't have to remove the block when I just want to swap cards. I can just, you know, like, use quick disconnects. But yeah, I still kind of want to remove this for the video. I kind of left it on purpose because I wanted to show what kind of mounts I get on this. Because yeah, I mentioned this before. I recently started using like backplates for the mounting, and yeah, that looks okay. Like, neither core nor block are lapped, so if you ask me, that looks pretty nice for the mount right there. And yeah, so this is the kind of backplate that I'm using. You know, instead of having the, yeah, also this is kind of what kind of mounting pressure you get. This is like a good indicator, because it's a pretty good imprint of the back of the core. But yeah, so instead of screwing these screws into the holes here, I have it into this plate, which then goes through here, and then when I mount the block down, the pressure doesn't go onto these 4 holes. It instead goes through the plate and then onto this pad, which pushes directly on the back of the core, which results in much more consistent and also just overall better mounts. So yeah, so I had these capacitors on here before, and now I'm pretty damn sure that they're all dead. Like, I don't think these do anything, because, like, when I only had these capacitors, first off, the core, like, basically wouldn't run Firestrike. It, like, barely passed Firestrike at stock clocks, and basically wouldn't overclock at all. And also, it screamed like a cicada. Like, there was some massive coil whine. First, I just assumed that's because 780 Ti's put a lot of power, but apparently not. Also, I never had coil whine on, like, the vanilla 780 that I e-powered. And it's like, yeah, it's less cores, quite a lot less cores, but still it's a GK110, and I ran that at, like, rather high voltages, and I never got coil whine from that one. So I should have noticed then. But yeah, these are probably gonna go off the card again, because these just don't seem to do anything. So I think these are just dead, either from the original short circuit that the VRM had, or because I used my 150 watt iron to solder these on, because at the time I couldn't find my slightly bigger tip for the smaller iron that I usually use for cap modding, and the very small tip I had on that current at the time, like, just wasn't strong enough for soldering in this area. I did locate the tip since then, and I used it today to solder all of this on. So for V-Core, I just kind of piggybacked all of these on top of the existing multi-layer ceramics, which, yeah, I think this is 1 capacitor less than the stock card. I think these should be 11, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, okay. Then the stock card had 11, because I think I counted it, and the stock card had 1 or more of these. These are still, like, the same spec, 820 microfarad, 2.5 volts. And then I also have this one right here, which technically can replace the 11th cap, which is a 1000 microfarad, 2.5 volt cap, which, to be fair, looks kind of out of place, and the solder connection is, like, not really good, because there's, like, a lot of solder there, and my cap modding iron just wasn't really strong enough here, but, like, it is on there. It doesn't look to be a very good connection, but it is on there, so I just kind of left it there. even though it looks like, you know, like all the other capacitors look kind of neatly placed, and this one's just kind of hanging there. But anyway. And then for the memory, I kind of did a bit of a dumb thing, because I added all of these capacitors before doing the memory part, and as you can see, this resulted in me not being able to use these pads. I tried to put multi-layer ceramics there, and I just wasn't able to because of this capacitor right here, and I can't pull that off without pulling all the others back off. So yeah, this is just gonna remain unused. Then I populated the 4 multi-layer ceramic pads here, and then put another 2 1000 microfarad 2.5 volt caps over that. And what all that means now is that the card now runs Firestrike with a memory clock of 2000 megahertz or 4000 effective, which corresponds to a plus 500 megahertz offset on the memory. Though I have to add that this is temperature sensitive, because it eventually started crashing at 500, and in the end even started crashing at 400. Also same for the core. Like, my ambient temperature is pretty high. Like, it is midnight right now, and I still have over 30 degrees in here. I usually spend most of my day at 32 degrees ambient, so my ambient temperature is rather high. And yeah, I was actually kind of surprised when I touched the radiator, and I actually felt like that the water in there was getting pretty warm, despite me having a rather sizable reservoir and 2 radiators in my test bench water loop. And that only occurred after like maybe 20 minutes of benching, and so yeah, cooling isn't the best, even though the core temperatures like seemingly stayed kind of low at like only 42 degrees. I think the hot ambient temp, like the memory chips were getting pretty hot. Like I touched them and they got pretty hot, and yeah, I don't know, because the core also started losing stability quite rapidly towards the end of my benching session, which is why I'm not filming it like running, because it just kind of stopped doing the clocks suddenly when I noticed that like the memory got hot and the water temperature rose rather rapidly. But yeah, so as for core clocks, this thing is a beast. I am pleasantly surprised, because for some time I was thinking that this core was a dud, mainly because I kinda assumed that these capacitors were not dead, and I was seeing like it barely passes Firestrike at stock for the core clock. I can now say that it passes Firestrike at 1400 megahertz at essentially stock voltage. So I set 1.3 volts on the e-power. Under load, the e-power would put out around 1.25, and I couldn't measure specifically because of the backplate for the block, but I did some measurements before, and the voltage that the core actually got should be around 1.2 volts. So that's a bit higher than what you usually get. Well, actually, this card actually comes at exactly 1.2 volts stock, so this one's probably like the same voltage that the other Matrix Platinum that I repaired runs at stock. At least it reports 1.2 volts. What it actually gets might be a bit different. But yeah, so like usually GK110 cards like 780s, 780 Ti's, stock voltage, as long as they're not power limited, is usually around like 1.17, 1.18 volts. So this is like 20 millivolts higher, but still 1400 megahertz stable. That's like big enough of a difference so that 20 millivolts in voltage difference don't really mean much. To put this into perspective, I don't actually. So my old daily card, my 780 Ti Windforce, used to do 1320 core. Admittedly not daily stable, but it used to be able to bench it. And then the 780 Ti Matrix Platinum that I repaired also does 1300 on the core. Now those two were on air cooling and not water cooling like this one. But yeah, actually I ran the other repaired 780 Ti Matrix Platinum on water on the same water block, and it didn't gain any core clocks. So yeah, it might be more comparable than you might think. But yeah, so like card runs 1400 megahertz core, and I didn't actually properly max it out. I only know that 1425 was not stable. There might be still a step in between 1400 and 1425 where it is stable. And I wasn't able to test what it actually does at more voltage yet, because 1.2 volts is like kinda low. Not because you don't get good clocks at that voltage, but because of clock stretching. Like, if you look back a couple of videos, I made a video testing clock stretching, and specifically the 780 Ti had some rather severe clock stretching, which basically means if you give it just more V-core, you don't change any clocks, you just give it more voltage, and your performance just goes up. Like, your score just goes up. Because the card's, like, basically what's happening is that the card can more effectively utilize its clock cycles. That's not actually what happens, but that's effectively what happens. So yeah, I wanted to test how those, like, because my scores were kinda low. I think the best I got was like a 14,600. Which, yeah, like, at those clocks, this should have been doing like over 15,000. So I was gonna test clock stretching, but that's the point where, like, I think the card just got too hot or something like that, because, like, I gave it more voltage, and then suddenly my memory got unstable, and would not pass at as high of a voltage, as high of a clock anymore. And then my core clocks also got really unstable, like even dropping the core clock by quite a lot didn't help, it still crashed. And then I set the voltage back down, and then it, you know, ran a little bit better again, but then also started like losing stability again. So I think that's just the point where, like, some part of the card like got too hot or something weird happened. Basically that's the part where I stopped testing the card. So yeah, I still need to figure out what that was. It was probably just like heat accumulating, like the memory. I'm not entirely sure how that might translate to core instability, but maybe my temperatures were going up. I didn't really pay that much attention to my core temperatures in the end. I only know it was like around 42 for most of the like middle beginning part. Could have been that it went to like 48, that would probably explain it. But yeah. So main takeaway is the card now clocks properly. It gets really, really good core clock results. It gets memory clock results of about average for AFR. Like, as long as I keep this cool, it like passes plus 500, which is like smacked. Well, it's like towards the better end of what AFR can do. I could like a 550 offset is, I think, where AFR tops out. So getting a 500, pretty decent, considering that some AFR cards top out at like 100. Specifically reference cards, but well, yeah, still same. Still the same memory chip. So yeah, so this one being AFR is not as good as the BFR on the other card that I repaired, but the core on this one, damn, does it clock well. And yeah, I might not even be done, because, like, given that these are like basically all dead, I'm probably gonna remove these and probably gonna put better caps on. So maybe I can locate some more caps that I salvaged, or just actually gonna have to order new ones. I've also been briefly thinking about putting some SP caps here, because I did also find some of these that I harvested from like other cards. The problem just being that, like, usually I solder on SP caps with hot air, and using hot air in a place like this where like basically all the power planes exposed might not really work that well. Also, like, it's right next to like burn PCB stuff. Might risk damaging the PCB quite a bit, because like this is a very heavy power plane with a lot of solder on it. I'm not gonna need a lot of heat to use hot air on this. Then again, I would probably have to use the 150 watt iron again if I want to put SP caps on this, because my 75 watt iron in this area is probably just not gonna work. Like, it is barely able to soften the solder on these smaller pads right here. On these bigger ones, no chance. Like, no chance whatsoever. So yeah, putting capacitors on this might be a bit more interesting. But we'll see. But these are probably going off the card again, because like these don't seem to do anything. Yeah, like actually, like I did only do some rather limited testing, but like putting these on, I don't think they did anything for like the core clocks. Because like even with these, it was barely passing Firestrike at stock clocks. It might have helped a little bit, but like I don't think they really did anything. And like the card's still at awful coil wine, or more like the E-power still at awful coil wine with these on. And then after putting these on, the coil wine like basically disappeared completely. Like you actually had to put your ear close to the card to even hear the coil wine. Like basically the same volume as like the fans blowing air. Before it was quite a lot louder than the fans. So yeah. And I think that's everything I wanted to say about the card. So it is in a... Yeah, I think in this state it would be like able to bench. Still some stuff to do. I still haven't fixed the 8 pins. They still need to be plugged in. And I did actually figure out that something, I don't know what, I pulled the input inductors, I don't know where it's going. But actually, if you just short the sense pins on these, the card does not fire up. Like, something actually needs 12 volt power there. Now, that doesn't make the solution that much more complicated. I just need to bridge 12 volt PCIe to 12 volt here and then just short the sense pins anyway. Then it would also work without plugging these in. But for now, I've just set up one of my test power. So like I have a test power supply that has like a broken 24 pin, but like the 8 pins still work on it. So I just use that power supply to plug these in and then have my main test bench power supply go into the E-power. And yeah, run the card that way. So yeah, so I don't think this is the final state of the card, but in this state it is now... I could finish the project at this point, basically. Like, this is now performing as well or better than it would have with the stock VRM. And like, it is capable to bench now. But there's still some ways in how I could make it better. Specifically putting more capacitors on and like finally doing that 8-pin fix so I don't need to bother plugging them in. And I could also just like shove a lot of multi-layer ceramics like to the backs of the memory chips. I don't think I'll be doing anything behind the core because I use that backplate and my phase change also uses a similar backplate, and there's not really a good way how I could stack capacitors sideways behind the core. So I think I'll just, the back of the core area is probably gonna remain as it is. But I could like stack some capacitors like sideways here, because like for example here I can like do a row, or here, or like maybe one capacitor fits in there or something like that. So that's a thing I'm potentially gonna do for the memory, and then just like cap mod the hell out of this part when I find a way on how to solder here that maybe doesn't involve my 150 watt iron. But yeah, so this is I think the third video on this card. Maybe I'm overdoing it a little bit with content about this thing, but I guess it is also a bit like kind of cool to see how it progresses. So yeah, I just, I cap modded this and I'm really happy with how this works now. So I'm making a video about it because I'm excited about it. But yeah, anyway, so thank you all for watching, hope you enjoyed, and until next time, goodbye.